Yeah, like Dave, obviously I started quite young in the industry, you can tell. Yeah. Most of you will recognise this here as being the Highway Code. Pretty thick document nowadays. It's changed quite significantly since I started driving 30 years ago. But you probably won't recognise this one, which is a colleague of mine gave me. It's his grandfather's one from 1935. And I think you can see right away by the dimensions of the book and the kind of categories that are in there, just how much driving in its own has come on as such a complex thing to do nowadays. And we talked a lot about signs and signposts as we've gone through here, and in here it's really interesting to see there are actually only 8 signs in 1935. And we talked about sign blindness. There are some, I counted over 160 here. So Neil's point around seeing the signposts and interpreting them are pretty strong. And I guess from a procedural compliance point of view, much easier to comply with 8 very clear signs than 150 plus. So none of this teaches you how to drive a car, of course, but that comes different. And I guess we've talked a fair bit here about the first steps. Same kind of principles here, where we're talking about something that has 15 topics. It provides you some guiding. Hopefully you'll see some signposts here that you'll recognise, that you'll be able to correct, that you'll look into further. But again, it doesn't teach you how to do your business. We've talked a lot as well about human factors not being just about safety. Clearly that's a huge part of it, but behavioural safety is not what it's all about. Essentially, my view on it is that it's actually good business. I think if you start looking at the issues that you encounter in business, repeated failures of equipment, for example, where you fail to go and look at the root causes, and when you start looking again, you rework, and how many times do you go around the loop before you realise, actually, I need to look a bit deeper here, the problem lies here, and so you rack up costs, frustration, downtime, and I guess operational risk as well in amongst there. So if you can increase your efficiency there, you're obviously going to improve your bottom line profit. One good example there I said around poor organisational learning is that if you don't recognise key failures and then spend the time to go and really investigate them, you may find that it's to do with operational procedures. It may be the way you're running the equipment outside its operating and design envelope. That's quite common. And when you suddenly find that actually, why do you expect a different outcome if that's the way you maintain things? And procedures is a classic failing, I think, that we see time and time again. You can have the best suite of procedures in the world. If the guys at the sharp end haven't been involved in developing them, they don't understand them, or perhaps they're not accessible, readable, understood, you may as well not have them. So they're pretty much worthless. I guess from my point of view, Les mentioned there, I come through a very grassroots method route to get to where I am today, and that gives me a lot of empathy for the various positions that I've worked in and people who work for me in those positions. I can really empathise with the difficulties they go through, and Neil gave a great example there of control rooms and how difficult it can be. I recall on Cormorant Alpha, after the Pelican upgrade there, we put new top sides on. We went from the old pneumatics in the control room straight onto DCS, distributed control systems, quite state-of-the-art stuff for the time. We trained the guys, but actually it was a huge mindset from where they were, and actually I don't think we really took in, with things like alarm flooding. For one event, like a pump trip, you maybe have 10 or 12 different levels of alarm coming in, flashing lights, all of the examples that you gave there, which meant that actually the operator was in a real difficult situation. Clearly you had ESD systems that you would like to think protect you, but an intervention by a human, if you don't set them up for success, you can only expect one outcome. The installations that I do now, though, are quite diverse. I'm going to show you some of them in a minute. I think I was going to use an example here that oil and gas, offshore, you become quite aligned with helicopter travel, and clearly in amongst that, there's all the design issues that you talk about for the actual pilots, procedures for them. They often using checklists. and you can see the parallels in our industry. We're much more using checklists than we ever were before. Recognising fatigue in pilots, yeah, I think you see that, but do we do it enough offshore? I'm not convinced. We have working time directives where we look at, and how deeply do we really look though? How often have you seen people who, you have an incident and you find it's near the end of a 2-week working or maybe even a 3-week working trip where they've been routinely working 14 and 15 hour days, they may be on night shift, there's all sorts of error enforcing conditions there, and you're exposing people to these without really any due consideration or really thinking about the risks involved. And so training competence, yeah, there's some, I'm going to try and give you some examples that I can think of from my own life. We talked about modifications. Workarounds, yeah, we've probably all seen workarounds, and sometimes you only find them as the result of an investigation. But one I can clearly remember is that there was a design of manual reset solenoids that has a sort of a bar, and it was almost many occasions they should have been put in as automatically resetting solenoids, but the operators routinely got to the point of just using a tie wrap to hold them closed. Clearly there was an emergency shutdown bypass that you're putting, but it became normalised. People decided that that's how it should have been designed, that's how we're going to operate it, and it's not until you get an ESD valve that remains open when it should be actually tripped closed that you realise that it has kind of underlying effects. So the types of platforms that I'm dealing with just now, this is the Hummingbird, and it was to pick up on Catherine's point about, yeah, we have got an ageing infrastructure, but actually we've got a whole blend of different installations. The Hummingbird is less than 5 years old, novel design, a lot of new technology on there, and yet the other installations in my portfolio, I've got the Beatrice field. Beatrice is 30 plus years old. It's a first generation platform, well designed, well built, but in amongst it we also have normally unmanned platforms on the Bravo and Charlie and the Jackie. We also have a wind farm, and then we also have the NIG terminal up here at sort of 40 miles north of Inverness. So you can see just even in there are a huge spread of complexity and types of installation that even I'm dealing with, never mind in the whole industry. But I still think the human factors elements are there regardless of whether it's a new build or whether it's something that's been around for nearly 40 years. Leadership, I think, is touched on as well. Catherine mentioned leadership. I firmly believe that being a good safety leader is about being visible. It's about being on site. It's about having empathy with the people that work for you, understanding the problems and trying to actually do something about it. Excuse me. Just this week, actually, I spent, all of this week so far up at the NIG terminal where we're submitting a COMA case, which is the onshore version of the safety regulations, and getting in amongst the nitty-gritty detail of how we build the bow ties, how we identify the risks, the major accidents, hazards, how do we then mitigate those risks in our bow ties to tell us, have we done everything that's reasonably practical to make this a safe site? And then you're taking the people with you, so there's workforce involvement, you're taking the site managers, the technicians, you're having collective discussions, so you're really in amongst it, and you're sending a really strong safety critical message when you're there, when you're visible, when you're present. One that comes to mind about safety critical communication, and Neil gave a couple of great examples, but the one that I always had really front of mind when I was offshore was around handovers, because I think at the heart of Piper Alpha was a lot of stuff to do around with shift handover, control of work clearly, but when you started to look at how effectively safety critical communications are passed between people, I don't think we were very good at it then, and I think we're kidding ourselves if we say we're great at it now, because we often find that one shift, certainly maybe at the end of the day, but perhaps at the end of a trip, the handover to a completely new set of people, and the way the information is displayed in a safety critical handover doesn't always make it immediately obvious of what the priorities are. There could be a lot of noise in amongst there, so sometimes being very succinct and very crisp on what the safety critical messages are is a key factor in making sure that you maintain uptime of the plant, but also you're looking after the safety of the people. Supervision, again, I think supervision is really interesting. How often do we promote people up through organisations? Well, maybe use myself as an example actually, because they're good at the last job, rather than do you train people to be supervisors, or do we just say he was a great technician, yeah, he's one for the future, or do we really prepare ourselves, set the guy up for success by saying, yeah, we're going to send you on some safety leadership training, we're going to look at a gap analysis and a personal development plan for you. It's really going to make you a better supervisor. So that's something to be aware of. I think staffing levels and workload, you'll often get the willing horse on your shift. And actually, I was a bit nervous of those guys because they'll maybe cut corners. They'll come back and say, that's done. How can it possibly be done? We haven't raised perimetry. We haven't had toolbox talks. How can you possibly have done that piece of work? So, there's always kind of warning signs in amongst there. And plant equipment, I think we've talked a lot about the human-machine interface, and clearly in design that's a huge issue. And I talked a wee bit about the ergonomics panels, and particularly around alarm management. It's a personal bugbear of mine. So to get to the point, I mean, that's just giving you a few practical examples of things that I've come across in my working life that I find interesting. Workforce engagement and being in amongst the people, understanding the problems, there is no substitute for it, I don't think. So what? What have we come up with? We talked a lot about first steps, and I think it's a pretty good document, and I would urge people to go and refresh themselves on that. I think the principles of it there come up with 15 topics that are pretty much all-encompassing. It was great. So what we've done as a group, we've taken people with practical experience, we've taken people from the regulators, we've got subject matter experts, and what we've attempted to do is create a very simple question set for pretty much every one of the 15 categories that you'll access via an electronic tool that will be web-based. Atlas have designed it for us, and as Dave said, it's not quite ready yet, but I'm pretty confident it'll be good. It's not a survey tool, it's an assessment tool. So the idea is that you go in, and we're going to run a couple of pilots. We're going to run one on Hummingbird, onshore and offshore, and what that's going to allow us to do, the front end's going to look a bit like the workforce engagement stuff. So you're going to have, what's your age, do you work onshore or offshore, and that's going to allow us to kind of analyse and maybe slice and dice the information a wee bit to see what we get. So it could be quite interesting. So the analysis then after is going to come up with you fill in the question sets which don't imply any knowledge of human factors. So if you get a group of guys on a shift on offshore to do, they just fill in the questions, you get an output, and the output is a series of dials. The dials are red, amber, green. We've put a bit of thought into how those are divided up and what the scoring would be, and then what happens there is it guides you then to industry best practice. So if you find you're pretty good here, you're amber there, well actually it still needs total looking at, but you're screaming red here. Here's some guidance, go and look at it, maybe do some further testing, probing to see how correct the data is. So the first page will look a bit like this, an assessment tool. There is an email address, and as Les was saying, it's human factors at stepchangeinsafety.net. If anybody here wants to go in and have a play with the tool and actually be part of the pilot, that would be great. So you would have an administrator in each of the partner groups, and that would allow you access. You would set up a survey, so we'll set one up for Hummingbird offshore and onshore, and then we'll get the output. There's a bit in here around, so it's set up on people, process and plant, and incident investigation. And you can go in and you can decide, and then it'll have a preamble. So if you look here, it's incident investigation. So it's taking you through, giving you a bit of a background. So there is a bit of raising awareness. There's a bit of implied training for people if they go through the assessment process. So they read this preamble, which is quite succinct, tells you what we're intending to do. There's a bunch of questions you fill in. It's a yes, no. Yes is not always the right answer, and no is not always the right answer, so it's quite balanced in that respect. And in some cases, there is a not applicable, because if you're talking about, for example, control room as the example I was using, and you happen to be a scaffolder, it doesn't really have much, application in your world. So, so you can see how it would be built up. Now you go through each of these question sets, and you could either do the full set or you could tailor it. So if your organisation thought, well, actually, I want to go and look at the people aspect of my organisation, you would only use that suite of questions. So you can see here that this is just one example. So this is about procedures. So it's a kind of tick box thing. So there's no right or wrong answer, and you just take the output, you submit it at the end, and then you would come up with a set of dials here. And as I say, that would then point you towards point you towards some industry guidance on where you might want to go next. So hopefully you've got the gist of my ramblings, and that makes a lot of sense. And I guess a call to arms really is get involved. If you're in a position where you can influence people to take up on this tool and start using it, we need support, and certainly from the members, and then from the individuals, any feedback we can get on the tool be really appreciated. Okay, thank you.